The fat acceptance movement has become a subject of daily mockery on the internet. From the cherry-picked compilations of its most bizarre claims, to the opinion pieces that accuse it of being a dangerous campaign to promote morbid obesity.
I'm sick and tired of people celebrating obesity and revering illness and commemorating poor health.
We've gone from fat acceptance to fat celebration.
So, is it really a frivolous movement founded in laziness and entitlement, as the rhetoric suggests, or is it a worthy cause whose core ideas got lost in translation through the loud and obnoxious voices of its fringe members?
Hi, I'm award-winning fat activist and professional feminist killjoy Virgie Tovar.
This video aims to explore as comprehensively as possible all the ideas, claims, and beliefs that are promoted by the fat acceptance movement and allow you to form your own opinion about its worthiness as a cause. Please be advised that in this video, I will be using terms such as fat people and fat activists. These are not being used in a derogatory fashion. I am simply maintaining consistency with the name of the movement and honoring the efforts to reclaim these words. From my research, the movement can be summed up into three main pillars. 1. Fighting institutional discrimination. 2. Promoting body positivity and inclusivity. And 3. Constantly shifting the definition of fatphobia. The roots of the fat acceptance movement trace back to the 1960s. On June 5, 1967, a radio personality named Steve Host organized a first-ever protest against fat discrimination. A group of 500 people gathered in New York City Central Park to eat ice cream, burn diet books, and celebrate fatness. Later that year, Lou Louderback, inspired by the protest, published an article titled "More People Should Be Fat," making this the first editorial publication calling out the anti-fat attitudes that pressured people to be thin. The article raised one of the first core pillars of the fat acceptance movement, which is fighting institutionalized discrimination against fat people. The argument is that fat people do not receive equal consideration for opportunities or fair treatment due to biases against their weight. Specifically, Louderback highlighted the discrimination that fat people faced in the job market and the bias against fat students in the college admissions process. The latter claim was based on a 1966 Harvard study, which analyzed suburban high school graduates applying to 3 colleges and found that college interviewers were 30% less likely to select fat students over their thinner counterparts. A similar study published in 2012, which analyzed 97 doctoral applicants at a public university, found that when interviews were conducted in person, fat students were less likely to get an admission offer compared to interviews conducted over the phone.
No, I would never hire an overweight person. For me, I guess my business is all about directing energy into businesses, helping them make more money. And for me, a very fat person, an obese person, an overweight person, whatever name we call that, wouldn't represent my company in the way that I think is important.
In 2010, Katrin Gill and others published a qualitative review of studies related to weight bias in hiring decisions, and found that 5 of the studies supported the existence of bias against fat people, while 1 study did not find weight-related bias. One of the studies they reviewed was an experimental study conducted by Kerry O'Brien and others, in which they attached before and after photos of people who had undergone weight loss surgery to fake job resumes and asked over 100 college students to rate which candidates they would hire to a managerial position. The study concluded that the resumes of the obese candidates were rated lower and given less starting salaries. A common argument that is used by proponents of weight discrimination in job selection is that physically demanding jobs require a level of fitness that overweight people do not have.
Mr. Griffin said he was told his weight would prevent him from being able to carry out his duties. I was told I couldn't do the job because I was too fat. I was told I wouldn't be able to push a lawnmower or climb a ladder, he said.
However, a study conducted by Stuart Flint and others found that obese people face the same selection bias even in sedentary jobs. Other proponents of weight discrimination in job selection often cite other costs associated with hiring fat people.
Why would that make them unemployable, in your opinion?
I think if you look at the facts, people who are obese, they take off nearly twice as many days off than those people within a healthy weight range for a start. That's going to have a financial implication.
In a systematic review of 50 studies, Andrea Gudler and others found indirect costs of hiring fat people, such as taking more sick days, making more health insurance claims, and the likelihood of leaving the job prematurely due to sickness or early death. The important question to ask is if weight discrimination is a civil rights issue that needs to be protected by the law. Some argue that weight discrimination is different from other protected forms of discrimination, such as race and gender, because obesity can be changed.
Obesity is a self-induced disease. In fact, it's a made-up disease. Your health is a personal responsibility.
Fat activists argue that obesity is not always a choice because there are people with medical conditions that cause excessive weight gain or limit the ability to lose weight.
There are actually a lot of physiological differences between people that can make them more or less susceptible to weight gain. Did you know that if you put a group of people on the same exercise program standardized to burn the same number of calories, some people will lose more weight than others? Because some people will have compensatory increases in appetite, nudging them towards eating more.
As of 2021, no country had laws that specifically prohibited weight discrimination except for one town in Iceland and the state of Michigan in the United States. Still under the theme of institutionalized discrimination is bias in medicine, which is an assertion that weight stigma affects the level and quality of healthcare that fat people receive in medical institutions. There are three main issues that often come up when discussing weight bias in healthcare: the negative attitudes of healthcare professionals, uninclusive healthcare equipment, and the health insurance costs.
So, as a fat person, I often dread medical appointments because of blatant medical fatphobia. The provider blamed everything on my weight and told me that I needed to go on a medication that made me feel really terrible.
The fear of going to the doctor is common among obese people due to the perception that healthcare professionals hold negative attitudes towards obese patients. Some surveys show that over 50% of obese people often cancel doctor's appointments due to the fear of being weighed. This perception has been supported in several studies. A 2013 study audio recorded over 200 doctor-patient interactions to assess the level of rapport that physicians built with patients and found that physicians make less emotional connections with obese patients than thinner patients. Doctors are also reported to spend 28% less time with obese patients. Some healthcare professionals explicitly indicated that they prefer treating thin patients. Medical professionals are also likely to misdiagnose obese patients because they attribute all symptoms to their weight instead of considering other potential causes. A review of 300 autopsy reports found that obese people had a 65% higher chance of having undiagnosed conditions. On the positive side, Ronald Fong and others surveyed over 9,000 adult patients and found that obese patients reported more satisfaction with their healthcare providers than thinner patients.
Going to the doctor was terrifying. In fact, I pretty much had a panic attack on my first appointment with the doctor I have now. He was very kind and very sweet to me, so everything netted out okay.
The second issue that fat activists raise is that medical equipment and treatments are not designed to fit fat people. Examples are the weight limits on MRI machines and blood pressure cuffs that are too small.
If you guys are new here, I do have uterine cancer. So because of the lymph nodes, they wanted me to do a PET scan because that would be able to show if it is cancer. It would light up. My lymph nodes would light up if it was cancer. So I actually was gonna do my MRI and my PET scan in the same day. I actually didn't get to do either of them. I went to the appointment and turns out the PET scan had a weight limit of 400 pounds. So I am 88 pounds too big.
Issues with medical equipment are not just limited to fit. Even when patients fit into radiographic equipment, the quality of diagnostic images may be poor due to X-ray beams not being able to penetrate through the fat. Dosages of certain medications are tailored based on lean body weight, and healthcare professionals do not adjust these doses when prescribing to obese patients, which leads to ineffective treatment. The third component of bias in healthcare is the claim that health insurance companies charge fat people more because of the assumption that they are unhealthy, so they are likely to use health insurance more. I could not find any supporting evidence for this claim. According to this article, the Affordable Care Act lists obesity as a pre-existing condition, and therefore health insurance companies cannot charge people higher premiums. Some critics of the fat acceptance movement think that it is unfair that in countries with socialized or free health care, obesity becomes a financial burden on all taxpayers.
And she may think that her health is not people's problem. It is. Did you know that obesity in the UK costs the NHS $6 billion? £6 billion a year. So what is that in dollars? Maybe like $8-9 billion? That's a lot of money. So you can say like, oh, it's not your problem. It is a taxpayer's problem. It surely is. It surely is.
The response to the anti-fat attitudes of healthcare professionals was the emergence of the health at every size sub-movement, which is commonly referred to as HAZE. It is one of the most contentious and possibly misconstrued parts of the fat acceptance movement.
That very line, healthy at every size, is not actually true. Can there be people at any size who are healthy at that moment? Yes. But is it true that no matter what your size, you're always able to be healthy? Like, that's not true.
The earliest traces of the health at every size ideas come from the Fat Liberation Manifesto, which was compiled in 1973 by a fat activist group called the Fat Underground. In the manifesto, they declared, "We repudiate the mystified science which falsely claims we are unfit." The phrase health at every size was popularized by a similarly titled book written by Linda Bacon. HAZE pushes back against the over-reliance on body mass index as a measure of health. Instead, it calls for a focus on other biomarkers such as blood pressure and cholesterol to determine if a person is healthy. The primary idea behind the health at every size movement is to encourage fat people to focus on developing healthy habits such as regular exercise instead of overly focusing on losing weight. It claims that even if a person has a high BMI, they can still be fit and avoid health issues if they eat healthy and lead an active lifestyle. This claim is supported in a few studies, including a meta-analysis of 10 studies done by Vaughan Berry and others, which found that overweight people who led an active lifestyle were metabolically healthier than those who were sedentary. So health at every size does not mean every person is healthy at any size, but instead it asserts that people of all body sizes can become metabolically healthy and fit by adopting a healthy lifestyle without necessarily losing weight. In response, critics of HAZE argue that
you could be a patient who is diagnosed with obesity, may have great cholesterol, may be not diabetic, their blood pressure may be great. The fact that their weight is above a certain cutoff, it puts them at a greater risk down the line, maybe not at this given moment.
All those lab values also don't mean that they don't have knee pain or hip pain or ankle pain or lower back pain, which are all things that we commonly see with people with obesity. Increased risk of endometrial cancer, for example, increased risk of mood disorders. Like, all of that is still there, even if our lab values are normal.
Obese individuals are far more likely to become sick or disabled as they age.
There's plenty of research literature supporting these claims, including a study conducted by a Danish pharmaceutical company, which reviewed 2.8 million UK patient records and found a correlation between obesity and early death. Specifically, the study found that obese people had a 50% higher chance of dying in middle age, at 12 times higher risk of type 2 diabetes and about 2 times more likely to experience heart failure compared to people of healthier BMI. Some HAES activists argue that the repeated attempts to lose weight are more unhealthy and dangerous than remaining obese due to the increased risks of developing eating disorders. Ariba Minom and others conducted a review of literature about the psychological and physical effects of diet cycling. 3 studies found no correlation between weight cycling and increased health risks such as diabetes and cardiovascular issues, while 1 study did find some association. And they also concluded that dieting may lead to development of eating disorders, which are more dangerous than obesity. HAES advocates for the rejection of diet culture, which is a practice of worshipping thinness and promoting weight loss through labeling certain foods as being good or bad. As an antidote to diet culture, HAES promotes the practice of intuitive eating, which encourages honoring the body's natural hunger cues and making peace with all foods instead of imposing eating restrictions. They also frequently highlight the limited success that obese people have with weight loss diets. This claim may be supported by the results of a study by Allison Fields and others, which tracked the body weight of 170,000 obese adults over a 9-year period and found that only 2% of them reached normal body weight. The second pillar of the fat acceptance movement is about promoting body positivity.
What's your definition of body positivity?
My definition of body positivity is pretty simple. It's self-acceptance, radical self-acceptance, regardless of whether you're as healthy as you'd like to be, or whether you love how you look, or maybe sometimes you don't. It's the belief that no matter how you feel in that moment, you know that you are deserving of good things and respect and dignity.
This pillar of the movement shifts focus away from other people's anti-fat biases and refocuses on eliminating internalized hatred that fat people have for their own bodies. It asserts that all people should accept, love, and feel happy in their bodies at whatever size. Although body positivity has become hugely associated with fat acceptance, it is not exclusively about fat bodies. The idea is to promote positive body image among all body types and eliminate insecurities. Fat activists argue that body positivity and self-acceptance cannot be achieved without eliminating fat shaming, increasing the representation of fat bodies in the media, and creating body-inclusive fashion brands.
What do we define as fat shaming? And the Google definition of fat shaming, the dictionary definition of fat shaming, is the action/practice of humiliating someone judged to be fat by mocking or criticizing their size.
Proponents of fat shaming argue that criticizing fat people for their weight is good because it will push them to lose weight in order to avoid further humiliation.
I believe that a bit of fat shaming goes quite a long way in making you think, actually, really? Okay, I better do something about it.
You gotta lose some weight. And then that guy could go and look in the mirror and go, fuck, I really do need to lose some weight. Yeah. And then they'll lose some weight and they'll be healthy and they'll talk to you 4 or 5 months later and go, you know, you fucked my head up that day. And because of that, I really started changing the way I eat and I'm so much healthier and I feel better and fat shaming works.
Fat activists contend that fat shaming has the opposite effect. According to an article titled "Fat Shaming is Making People Heavier and Sicker," published in the Canadian Medical Association Journal, fat shaming is linked to depression, low self-esteem, and exercise avoidance, among other issues. So, if fat people are constantly being shamed, they're less likely to love themselves enough to seek positive changes to their body. The second part of body positivity is promoting positive representations of fat people in the media. Here, fat activists argue that the media plays a big role in setting beauty standards and shaping the public's perceptions about different types of bodies.
But unhealthy people still deserve to see themselves represented.
But why would you want to be represented in a pop video? I don't get it.
If the media only shows thin bodies in modeling, music videos, or as fictional romantic interests, it promotes the idea that only thin bodies are beautiful or desirable. Or more detrimentally, Only portraying fat people as cruel villains or comic relief characters creates an association between fatness and lack of morality or value beyond serving as amusement for others. These portrayals create negative stereotypes, and when internalized, they lead to body image issues and insecurities.
I am bothered by things like the cover of Cosmo because I think it glorifies and glamorizes, and I'm going to use the word obesity. I think that the person looks like they've made a healthy life choice. People see it as that, and they see them as a good role model, and so they would copy that. In the long term, there are going to be problems because fat we all think of as harmless. It isn't.
One of the earliest publications dedicated to showcasing and promoting the beauty of fat bodies is a BBW magazine founded by Carol Shaw in 1979. BBW stands for Big Beautiful Women, which is a phrase that is still popular today in describing plus-size women in the dating scenes. This advocacy for inclusion has not been limited to calling out mainstream media. Fat activists also take to social media to show off their semi-naked bodies in order to inspire other fat people to feel more comfortable, confident, and happy in their bodies. These confident displays of fat bodies often end up in compilations labeled as cringy or dangerous campaigns to promote morbid obesity. The final part of body positivity is advocating for body-inclusive fashion brands. Fat activists are frustrated with the lack of clothing that fits or flatters fat bodies. Clothing is one of the main ways people express themselves, but the lack of options for fat people limit their ability to dress themselves stylishly, which furthers their body insecurities. The first retail clothing brand dedicated to fat people was founded by Lane Bryant in 1904. And only 70 years later, Nancy Radman founded Forgotten Women, a chain of stores exclusively for fat women, after she had a frustrating shopping trip where she could not find any clothes that fit her body. Although progress in this area has been slow, recent years have seen more fashion brands that design clothes exclusively for plus-sized people. It is now time to discuss the final pillar of the movement. This is the part that is often labeled as extremist, obnoxious, and garners most of the criticism and outrage that surrounds the movement, even from former members or allies. This pillar is a constant redefinition of fatphobia to fit any narrative that fat activists want to promote that week. The official definition of fatphobia is showing hostility and hatred for fatness or fat people. So most of the issues that I've discussed so far meet the definition of fatphobia. However, some extremists take it a step further by labeling everything as fatphobic.
If you are losing weight because you want to feel better, be in less pain, be healthier, all of these things, that's fatphobic.
Today, I'm talking about things that are inherently fatphobic. It's facts. You can't disagree with me. First up on the list, we have booths. Booths are fatphobic. Period. Have you ever tried to squeeze into a booth? Fatphobic. Next we have chairs with arms. And I'm starting off with the basics, okay? Booths, chairs with arms. Chairs, why do chairs have arms? They literally don't need to, and that's fatphobic. Thank you so much. Next we have hotel towels. That's a basic one. Have you ever seen a hotel towel? It is literally 1 inch lengthwise, 1 inch widthwise. Next we have all clothing companies except for about 6, give or take, all fatphobic.
In her book titled Fearing the Black Body, Sabrina Strings traces the origins of fatphobia to the transatlantic slave trade, where black slaves were associated with larger and curvier bodies. So American white people were fearful of gaining weight because they did not want to look like the black bodies they deemed inferior. Some fat activists use this tragic history to directly equate fatphobia to racism and label fat bias as a form of oppression that is on the same level as racism and homophobia.
It's fatphobic. Just like lumping all black people in one group and saying, I don't like black people is.
We're not doing this today. We are not comparing fatphobia to racism. It's not going to happen.
So this is my full map of the fat acceptance movement, at least as I understand it. I hope it clarifies some of the issues that have been clouded by the sensationalism surrounding the movement.